They declared her a failure in the combat trial, then realized the instructors were defeated. The arena was loud that morning. Hundreds of cadets filled the observation deck of Station Orion 7, pressed against the glass railings, talking over each other, pointing down at the combat floor below. Some were eating, some were making bets. Most were just excited to watch someone get crushed. The combat trial happened once a year. Every cadet from every species enrolled at the Galactic Defense Academy had to participate. There were no teams, no partners. Just one cadet, one opponent, and a timer set to 3 minutes. The judges sat in a raised booth on the far end of the arena. 5 of them, each from a different member species of the Galactic Union. They held scoring tablets and wore the flat, unimpressed expressions of people who had seen everything before. The floor below was wide and gray, marked with faint yellow lines that formed a large circle. Outside that circle, a cadet was disqualified. Inside it, anything was fair. The walls were reinforced. The ceiling lights were bright and white and clinical. It felt less like a sports arena and more like something between a courtroom and a butcher's floor. Cadet Hana stepped through the entry door on the south side. She was not tall. She was not built like a soldier. She had short black hair that barely touched her jaw, narrow shoulders, and the kind of quiet face that people tended to forget in a crowd. She wore the standard gray training uniform of Earth's Soul Division. No extra padding, no reinforced joints, no tactical vest. She carried nothing. She walked to the center circle marker, stopped, and stood with her hands loose at her sides. The crowd barely reacted. On the other side of the arena, the north door opened. What walked out was not small. The HFY were a species built for one thing and one thing only. They had 4 limbs, 2 of which were arms that ended in hands the size of dinner plates. Their skin was dark gray and rough, like cooling lava rock. Their eyes were set wide apart under a heavy brow ridge, and when they moved the way landslides moved, slow at first, then suddenly, all at once. The one that stepped into the arena stood nearly 9 feet tall and weighed somewhere around 400 kilograms. His name was Brax. He was the top-ranked combat cadet in his entire division. The crowd got louder. Instructor Ryan stood at the edge of the judges' booth with his arms folded. He was a lean man, older, with a gray streak in his dark hair and the kind of posture that came from 20 years of military service. He had trained dozens of cadets from Soul Division. He had seen nervous ones, aggressive ones, brilliant ones, and foolish ones. He looked down at Hana and said nothing, but the expression on his face said something anyway. It said, "This is going to be short." The signal tone rang out across the arena. Brax moved. He crossed the distance between them faster than something his size should have been able to move. His right arm swung in a wide arc, low and hard, designed to sweep a smaller opponent off their feet and send them skidding out of the circle. It was a clean opening move, efficient, practiced. Hana stepped left. Not a dive, not a roll, just a single calm step to the left, and the arm passed in front of her with 6 inches to spare. Brax reset and came again. This time a forward charge, head low, both arms out, trying to wrap her in a bear grip that would end the match in one move. The crowd leaned forward. Hana stepped right, turned her back slightly, and let him pass. Brax stopped near the edge of the circle, turned around, and looked at her. There was a moment of quiet confusion in the arena. A few cadets from the HFY section started making noise, sharp, clipped sounds that translated roughly to laughter. Brax attacked again, and again. A downward hammer strike, a low kick aimed at her ankles, a grab attempt, a shoulder charge. Hana moved each time. Always small movements, always calm. She never grabbed him back. She never struck. She never tried to push him out of the circle. She just moved and watched and breathed, and moved again. 90 seconds passed. The crowd went from excited to confused to genuinely unsettled. By the 2-minute mark, Brax was beginning to breathe harder. Not because he was tired, he had barely exerted himself, but because something about this was wrong, and he could feel it, and he didn't know what it was. He stopped in the center of the circle, and stared at the small human woman standing 8 feet away from him, with her hands still loose at her sides, and her face still completely calm. He charged one more time. She stepped aside. The timer rang. 3 minutes were up. The judges looked at their tablets. The scoring system was clear. Points were awarded for strikes landed, takedowns completed, opponents pushed from the circle, or submission holds achieved. Hana had done none of these things. Her score was read out over the arena speakers with the flat neutral tone of the automated system. Cadet Hana, Soul Division, Earth. Engagement score 0. Combat effectiveness rating 0. Trial result, failure. The crowd reacted to that. Some cadets from other divisions applauded, mostly to be rude. The HFY section was loud and satisfied. A few of the human cadets in the observation deck looked down at their boots. Up in the judges' booth, one of the alien delegates, a tall, narrow-limbed Vethori named Cassius, leaned toward the microphone and added a comment that was not required, but was given anyway. The human cadet showed no combat instinct. Prey behavior. Avoidance without purpose. That comment was logged into the official trial record. Instructor Ryan watched Hana walk off the arena floor through the south door. She didn't look up at the crowd. She didn't look at the judges. She walked at the same pace she had walked in at, with the same expression, and disappeared through the door. Ryan uncrossed his arms. He tapped something on his tablet, a note to schedule a performance review. He had seen cadets freeze before. He had seen cadets panic, or shut down, or give up. He thought he understood what had happened down there. He was wrong, but he didn't know that yet. Down in the corridor outside the arena, Hana walked alone. She passed 2 cadets from the Vethori division, who looked at her and said something to each other in their own language. She didn't stop. She turned a corner, found a quiet alcove near the water stations, and sat down on a bench. She pulled a small notebook from her front pocket, old-fashioned, actual paper, which other cadets had made fun of before, and she opened it to a fresh page. She clicked her pen and began to write. Right arm dominant. Leads every charge with the right shoulder. Reaction delay after a missed grab, approximately 1.4 seconds. Left knee slightly stiff. Compensates with wider stance. Weight distribution heavy on the front foot during forward charges. She wrote for 3 full minutes without stopping. Then she closed the notebook, put it back in her pocket, stood up, and walked to her next class. They declared her a failure in the combat trial, then realized the instructors were defeated. By the next morning, everyone knew. That was the thing about Station Orion 7. It was a closed environment, a space station the size of a small city, sealed off from the outside, filled with cadets and instructors and administrative staff and visiting delegates, and absolutely nothing to do in the evenings except talk. News moved fast, gossip moved faster, and the story of the human cadet who had stood in the circle for 3 minutes and done absolutely nothing had moved at the speed of embarrassment, which was fastest of all. The rankings were posted on every main corridor screen at 0600 hours. Hana's name sat at the very bottom of the Soul Division combat list. Below it, in small gray text, the system had automatically generated a performance note. 0 engagement recorded. Remedial assessment recommended. 3 cadets stopped in front of the screen when she walked past it on her way to the morning meal hall. They didn't say anything to her directly. They just looked at the screen, then looked at her, then back at the screen, and one of them, a broad-shouldered HFY cadet named Breck, younger brother of Brax, made a sound that needed no translation. Hana looked at the screen for exactly 2 seconds, and kept walking. The meal hall was large and loud, and divided along species lines the way it always was, not by any official rule, but by the invisible social architecture that forms wherever groups of different people are forced to exist together. The humans sat in the east section, near the windows. Hana got her tray, walked to the table where her division usually sat, and put her food down. The conversation at the table didn't stop, but it adjusted, the way a river adjusts around a rock. The flow continued, just not quite in her direction. Cadets who had talked to her the day before now found reasons to look at their food. A girl named Jian, who had shared study notes with Hana just 2 weeks earlier, shifted slightly on the bench so that her shoulder was turned away. It wasn't cruelty exactly. It was the particular social cowardice of people who didn't want to be associated with a failure. Hana ate her breakfast. She did not appear to notice any of it, though she noticed all of it. Across the hall, at a table near the water dispensers, Cadet Do-yun sat alone, with his tray and his datapad. He was quiet by nature, not shy exactly, but the kind of person who preferred watching to participating, which made him unusual in a place full of people who were professionally competitive. He had been in Hana's morning tactics class for 2 months. They had never spoken more than a handful of sentences to each other, but they shared a bunkroom corridor, which meant he had learned her patterns without meaning to. She always slept at the same time. She always woke at the same time. She ran the same route every morning at 04:45 before anyone else was up. She never raised her voice. She never reacted when other cadets made comments. She studied longer than anyone else in the division, but her academic scores were average. Good enough. No more. Do-hyun had not thought much about any of that before yesterday, but he had watched the combat trial from the observation deck, and unlike most of the cadets around him, he had not watched Brax. He had watched Hana, and the thing he had seen, or thought he had seen, was sitting uncomfortably in the back of his mind, like a splinter he couldn't quite reach. After breakfast, he went back to his quarters and pulled up the trial footage on his datapad. The Academy recorded every combat trial from 6 camera angles. The footage was available to all cadets for review, officially for the purpose of self-improvement, though mostly cadets used it to re-watch impressive fights and argue about technique. Nobody, as far as Do-hyun knew, had ever gone back to re-watch a 0-score match. He watched it 3 times. The first time, he watched the full match at normal speed. The second time, he slowed it down and focused on Hana's feet. The third time, he paused it every few seconds and watched her eyes. He sat back in his chair after the third viewing and stared at the ceiling. Her feet were never random. Every step she took was at a precise angle, not simply away from the attack, but always to a position where the next attack would also be predictable. She was not running, she was positioning. She was placing herself exactly where she wanted to be after each movement, like someone playing a game of stones 3 moves ahead. And her eyes never left Brax's left knee. Not his face, not his hands, his knee. The one that Do-hyun, now that he thought about it, did seem slightly stiff when he watched the footage carefully. Brax had favored it twice, barely, almost invisibly, but Hana had been watching it the entire time. Do-hyun set the datapad down and thought about that. He thought about what it would mean if she had not been failing the trial. If she had been doing something else entirely, something that had no name in the scoring system and no box to tick on the judges' tablets. He almost said something at lunch, but the delegate Cassius was eating with the human division instructors at the far table. Some kind of official review meeting about Sol Division's overall trial performance. And Do-hyun heard the word pray used again in the conversation, casually, the way you talk about something that has already been decided. Instructor Ryan did not object to the word. He just looked slightly tired and moved on to discussing other cadets. Do-hyun closed his mouth and went back to his food. That afternoon, the official trial summary was sent to all Sol Division cadets. It included individual feedback notes from the judges. Most notes were short. Hana's was the shortest of all, just one line written by Judge Cassius. Recommend reassignment to non-combat track. Do-hyun read it twice. Then he saved it to a private folder and added a note of his own underneath it, in text that only he could see. Or she's the only one in that arena who knew exactly what she was doing. He didn't know if he was right. He had no proof, just the footage and a feeling that lived in the same part of his brain that was good at tactics problems. But he kept watching. He paid attention in the corridors, in the mess hall, in the brief moments when he passed Hana in the bunkroom hallway late at night. She was always writing in that notebook. He never asked what was in it. Not yet. They declared her a failure in the combat trial. Then realized the instructors were defeated. 3 weeks passed. The combat trial results stayed on the corridor screens for 10 days before the system cycled them out and replaced them with the next round of academic rankings. Hana's name moved off the screens but stayed in conversations. Not always loudly. Sometimes it was just a look, the kind that passes between people who share a joke that doesn't need words anymore. She trained every morning at 04:45. She attended every class. She did not argue, did not complain, and did not ask for a review of her trial score, which she was technically entitled to do under Academy regulations. Her instructors noted her continued attendance and her average performance, and wrote nothing special in their reports. Instructor Ryan saw her twice in the corridor during those 3 weeks. Both times, he gave her the brief nod that instructors gave to cadets they had not completely written off. Both times, she nodded back. Nothing more was said. Do-hyun kept watching. He had gone back to the trial footage 11 more times by the end of the 3rd week. He had started writing his own notes, not in a paper notebook like Hana, but in a password-locked file on his datapad that he had titled, with some irony, Tactics Assignment. He had mapped every one of her movements in the arena and assigned probable intent to each. His conclusion after 11 viewings was the same as his conclusion after 3. She had not been losing. She had been learning. But he still had no proof of what that learning was for. On the morning of the 22nd day after the combat trial, every cadet in the academy received a standard notification on their datapads. It read, "All cadets report to your assigned corridor stations at 1300 hours for a routine facility inspection drill. Standard uniform required. No equipment necessary." It was the kind of message nobody thought twice about. Facility inspections happened a few times a year. Cadets stood at their corridor positions, while staff walked the station, checking emergency systems, reviewing evacuation routes, running atmospheric tests. Boring and mandatory. The kind of drill that everyone attended while mentally being somewhere else entirely. At 12:55 hours, Hana stood at her assigned position in Corridor 7D, a long gray hallway in the residential block, with overhead lights spaced at even intervals and 4 intersecting side passages. There were 6 other cadets stationed along the same corridor, spread out at 30-meter gaps. Do-hyun was one of them, positioned 2 spots down from her. At exactly 1300 hours, the corridor lights went out. Not a warning. One moment the hallway was fully lit, and the next it was completely black, the kind of dark that had weight to it. Then a voice came from the overhead speakers, not the automated system voice, but Instructor Ryan's actual voice, flat and precise. "This is an unannounced live response drill. You have been designated as targets. Aggressors are active in your corridor. Stun rounds are live. Objective: survive 60 seconds. Timer starts now." There was a moment of absolute silence in the corridor. Then the sound started. Boots on the floor, deliberate and controlled, coming from the south entrance of Corridor 7D. More than one set, moving in formation. The other cadets in the corridor reacted immediately and badly. Two of them ran. One pressed himself against the wall and stayed there. One tried to activate his datapad for the light and dropped it. The sounds of panic were soft but clear. Sharp breathing, the scrape of boots, a muffled curse. What Hana did was simpler. She stepped backward once, put her shoulders against the wall at the intersection of the main corridor and the nearest side passage, and went completely still. She listened. 4 sets of boots, moving in a standard 2x2 tactical sweep, 2 in front, 2 behind, covering angles. She could tell by the weight of the footsteps that they were in full gear. She could tell by the spacing that they had trained together. She could tell by the speed that they were not rushing. They were methodical, professional, and confident. She recognized Instructor Ryan's stride from the way it sounded. He walked slightly heavier on the left foot. She had noticed that weeks ago in the classroom hallway. The other 3 she identified by elimination. She had watched all of the combat track instructors move over the past several months. She had done it quietly, without ever making it obvious, the way you learn things when nobody knows you are paying attention. The first figure came around the corner of the side passage. What happened next was fast. Not flashy, not loud. There was no dramatic sequence, no exchange of strikes, no struggling. Hana moved twice, used the figure's own forward momentum and the weight of their gear against them, applied pressure to 1 point on the wrist and 1 point on the shoulder in a way that produced an immediate and involuntary cooperation from the person's body. And the first instructor was on the floor with their stun weapon out of their hand before they had finished turning the corner. She did not shoot anyone. She moved the weapon aside. Then she waited at the corner for the next one. The second instructor came fast, responding to the sound of the first going down. Hana let them pass the corner entirely, stepped in behind, and repeated the process. Different points, adjusted for the different body type. She had memorized their physical proportions during classroom sessions. But the same principle. The floor again. The 2 in the back heard something wrong and spread apart, which was the correct tactical response. It slowed her by approximately 8 seconds. It did not stop her. When the corridor lights came back on, the automated timer read 4 minutes and 31 seconds. All 4 instructors were on the floor of Corridor 7D. None of them were unconscious. None of them were injured. They were restrained, each one held in place by their own equipment, their belts and straps and gear repositioned with a quiet, practical efficiency that spoke of a person who had thought about this in advance. Stun weapons were stacked neatly against the wall, 2 meters away, out of reach of everyone. Hana stood in the center of the corridor, arms loose at her sides. Do-hyun was 30 meters away, pressed against the wall, where he had stayed for the entire drill. He had not been touched. He stared at the 4 instructors on the floor, then at Hana, then at the instructors again. Instructor Ryan lay on his back and looked up at the ceiling. He breathed in slowly, then out. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he reached up and pressed the comm button on his collar. "Command," he said, in a voice that was extremely careful and extremely calm. "Pull every camera in Corridor 7D. All angles, from the moment the lights cut out." A pause from the other end. "Sir, is the drill complete?" Ryan looked at the ceiling for another moment. "Yes," he said, "the drill is complete." They declared her a failure in the combat trial, then realized the instructors were defeated. The footage review took 4 hours. Commander Yuna ordered it personally, which meant it happened in the main analysis room on level 3 with 6 screens running simultaneously, and a small group of senior staff sitting in chairs that nobody was relaxed in. Instructor Ryan was there. 2 senior combat instructors were there. A medical officer was there, though she had nothing to do. All 4 instructors from the drill had been checked over and released without a single bruise between them, which was its own kind of remarkable. And 2 representatives from the Academy's oversight board were there, one of them the delegate Cassius, who had come because the incident report had reached the diplomatic wing within 40 minutes of Ryan's comm call. Nobody spoke much during the first viewing. They just watched. The footage from Corridor 7D had been captured by 7 cameras, 3 in the main hall, 2 at the side passage intersections, 1 at the south entry where the instructors had come in, and 1 mounted high on the ceiling that covered the full length of the corridor in a wide overhead angle. That ceiling camera turned out to be the most important one. On the overhead view, Hana was a small gray figure standing at a wall intersection. All around her, the other cadets were moving, running, pressing against walls, fumbling. She was completely still. That stillness in the middle of the movement was the first thing that made people in the analysis room sit differently in their chairs. Then the instructors entered the frame. The senior combat instructor named Woojin, who had been one of the 4 in the corridor, and who was watching the footage of himself from the outside for the first time, leaned forward when the first contact happened and said nothing. He watched his own body hit the floor. He rewound it, watched again. He rewound it 3 more times, each time pausing at the moment of contact and studying the exact position of Hana's hands. She knew which joint, he said finally. Nobody asked him to explain, because everyone was watching the same thing. She had not used maximum force. She had not needed to. She had used the minimum amount of pressure applied to the exact correct point to produce the exact correct result, which was a body that cooperated with gravity and stopped being a problem without being harmed. It was the kind of technique that required either years of formal training in a very specific discipline, or a level of observational study so deep and careful that it produced the same result. Hana had no formal record of that training. Her intake files were pulled and reviewed during the second hour. She had standard physical conditioning scores, good but not exceptional. She had no listed background in advanced close-contact fighting systems. She had grown up in Busan, attended a standard secondary school, and qualified for the academy through academic testing, not combat evaluation. The footage review moved backward from there. Ryun requested the combat trial footage from 3 weeks prior, which was pulled and put on the 3rd screen. Then, the room was watching both at once. The trial on the left, the corridor drill on the right. And the connection between them became clear in a way that made the air in the room feel different. In the trial, Brax had attacked 8 times. All 8 times, Hana had moved to a specific position. Nobody had noticed at the time that those positions were not random escapes, but deliberate placements. She had moved to exactly the angle where the next attack would also be readable, where she would have the most information and the least exposure. She had not been avoiding a fight. She had been running an experiment. On the 4th screen, Woojin pulled up the Academy's general corridor footage, a standard recording system that covered all common areas, and began searching backward through 30 days of footage for Hana's face. He found her in hallways, in the meal hall, in classroom corridors. In all of it, she was doing the same thing she had done in the arena, watching people move. Not in an obvious way. She never stared, but her eyes moved with the specific tracking pattern of someone who was cataloging data, and she had been doing it every single day, in every common space, with every instructor who passed her in the corridor. She had been studying them for months. Not their techniques in the abstract, their specific techniques, their specific bodies, the way Rune's left foot landed slightly heavier, the way Woojin rolled his right shoulder back before he moved forward. The physical patterns that every person carries without knowing they carry them, the habits of movement that repeat, and that most people never notice because most people do not spend 3 months watching quietly and writing notes in a paper notebook. Cassius, the delegate who had written prey behavior into the official trial record, sat very still through most of the footage review. When the 4th hour ended, and the senior staff began to talk in low voices about what they had just watched, he said nothing for a long time. Then he asked a single question. Why did she not show this in the trial? Ryan, who had been thinking about the same question for 4 hours, answered without looking away from the screen. Because she wasn't done yet. The room was quiet after that. On the 5th screen, Wu Jin had pulled up a map of the corridor and used the overhead footage to plot every position Hana had occupied during the drill, connected by lines. The shape it made on the map was not random movement. It was a pattern, a careful, pre-planned series of positions that accounted for the instructor's formation, the layout of the corridor, and the locations of the other cadets. She had mapped the corridor in advance. She had decided where to stand, where to move, and where to put each person after they were down, before a single light had been switched off. The paper notebook was brought in by the end of the review. One of the corridor cadets had seen her drop it in the confusion, and picked it up, and it had made its way to the analysis room. Commander Yuna opened it to the first page. It was dated 3 months ago. The first entry was a list of instructors' names, with notes next to each one, short observations about movement, dominant sides, reaction patterns, footwear, and estimated response times in darkness. Rune found his own name about halfway down the first page. He read his entry twice. It was extremely accurate. The last page of notes, written the night before the drill, contained a numbered list. The list described, in plain and simple language, exactly what had happened in Corridor 7D, in the correct order, accounting for the correct number of aggressors, using the correct technique for each one. She had written it down before it happened. Yuna closed the notebook and set it on the table in front of her. She looked at the screens for a moment, all 5 of them, each one showing a different angle of the same quiet, careful, completely deliberate person. They declared her a failure in the combat trial, then realized the instructors were defeated. Hana was in her quarters when the knock came. She was sitting at her small desk with her lamp on, and a new notebook open in front of her, writing. She did not look startled when the knock came. She capped her pen, closed the notebook, and opened the door. The cadet standing outside was from the administrative division, a young man with a formal expression who told her that Commander Yuna wanted to see her in the Level 3 briefing room. He said it politely and without explanation, which usually meant either something very bad or something that the person delivering the message didn't fully understand themselves. Hana put on her jacket and followed him. The walk to Level 3 took 7 minutes through mostly empty corridors. It was late evening, and the station had settled into its quieter rhythms. Fewer people in the halls, softer lighting in the common areas, the distant mechanical hum of the life support systems more noticeable in the quiet. Hana walked without hurrying. The administrative cadet glanced back at her twice, as if expecting her to ask what this was about. She didn't ask. She already had a fairly good idea. Commander Yuna's office was at the far end of the Level 3 analysis corridor. The door was open when Hana arrived. The room inside was not large. A desk, 2 chairs on one side, 1 chair on the other, and a long window that looked out at the dark side of the station, where the stars were visible in a wide, still field of black. Yuna was standing at the window when Hana entered. She was a compact woman with short graying hair, and the kind of posture that didn't come from military training, but from something older. The way certain people carry themselves when they have spent a long time making decisions that mattered. She did not turn around immediately. Hana stood near the door and waited. After a moment, Yuna turned, looked at her, and gestured to the chair across from the desk. Hana sat. Yuna sat on the opposite side. She put the paper notebook on the desk between them, Hana's notebook, and folded her hands on top of it. There was a silence that Yuna did not seem to feel the need to fill quickly. Then she asked the question she had been holding since the end of the footage review. Why didn't you just win the first trial? Hana looked at the notebook on the desk, and then at Yuna. Because winning once proves nothing, she said. Understanding everything wins forever. Not the way people studied her, to find something wrong, but the way you study something when you are recalculating your understanding of it from the beginning. You lost your ranking, Yuna said. You were publicly graded as a failure. You let every person on this station think you had no ability. Yes, Hana said. That didn't bother you? It was not quite a question. Hana answered it anyway. It was useful, she said simply. Yuna was quiet again for a moment. She had commanded soldiers and diplomats and cadets across 20 years of service. She had met people who were brave, people who were brilliant, people who were disciplined, and people who were dangerous. What she was looking at now was something she did not have a clean word for, a kind of patience so deep and so deliberate that it looked, from the outside, like its exact opposite. She thought about the notebook, about 3 months of quiet observation, about a cadet who had sat in the same meal hall and walked the same corridors as everyone else, and had used every single day of it to learn things that could not be found in any training manual, because they lived in the specific, particular bodies and habits of specific, particular people. She thought about the trial, the 0 score, the prey behavior comment in the official record, the cadets who had turned their shoulders away at breakfast. She thought about Corridor 7D, and 4 trained instructors on the floor, and not a bruise among them. You could have hurt them, Yuna said. I know, Hana said. But you didn't. There was no reason to. Yuna picked up the notebook and turned it over once in her hands, then set it back down. There is a division, she said, that most people on this station don't know exists. It is not listed in the Academy's public structure. It does not appear in the transfer records that other species can access. The people assigned to it do not announce that assignment. She paused. It is called the Strategic Shadow Division. It works in environments where visible force is the wrong tool, where the most important thing a person can do is understand a situation so completely that they never need to be in a fight at all, and where when a fight becomes unavoidable, it ends before anyone realizes it has begun. She looked at Hana steadily. I am telling you this because you are being offered a transfer. Hana did not react with surprise. She did not smile or look pleased or ask any of the questions that most people would have asked. She looked at Yuna with the same calm, even expression she had worn in the arena and the corridor and every meal hall and classroom for 3 months. I accept, she said. Yuna nodded once. Report to Sublevel 4 at 0600. Someone will meet you. Bring the notebook. Hana stood, picked up the notebook from the desk, and walked to the door. At the threshold, she stopped, just for a moment, and looked back. The delegate Cassius, she said. He walks with his weight on his right side. He has a longer reaction time on his left. In an enclosed space, he moves toward exits before he moves toward threats. She said it plainly, without emphasis. I thought that might be useful. Then she left. Yuna sat alone in her office for a while after that. She looked out at the stars through the long window and thought about what she had just seen and what it meant, not just for Hana, but for the broader question that species across the Galactic Union had been arguing about since humans first arrived on the interstellar stage. The argument was always about aggression. Humans were aggressive. Humans were emotional. Humans acted fast and hit hard and escalated situations that other species would have managed quietly. That was the reputation. That was what the combat trial scoring system was built to measure. speed, strength, decisiveness, the willingness to engage and overwhelm. Nobody had built the scoring system to measure what Hana had done. There was no box for 3 months of quiet observation. There was no score for 4 instructors neutralized, without injury, in total darkness. There was no rating for the kind of patience that could sit with public humiliation for 3 weeks and feel nothing but mildly useful, because the humiliation was just more data about how other people assumed and misjudged and underestimated. In the diplomatic wing, Cassius was writing his revised report to his government. He was a careful writer, precise and measured. But the revised report was harder to write than he expected, because he kept stopping and reconsidering the words. His original report had used the phrase prey behavior and had meant it as a final conclusion. He now understood it had been a first impression and a wrong one, and that the gap between those two things had been wide enough for 4 trained soldiers to fall through. He wrote and deleted and wrote again for a long time. What he eventually sent said in careful and measured diplomatic language that humanity's most dangerous quality was not what had been previously assessed. It was not aggression, not physical capability, not speed of escalation. It was the capacity to be underestimated, to appear to be one thing while being entirely another, not through deception exactly, but through a kind of radical patience that most species did not have and could not easily develop, because it required something that most people found genuinely difficult: the ability to lose in public and not care, because losing was just a step in a longer process that was already decided. He sent the report and sat back in his chair. In Sublevel 4, a small office with no nameplate on the door had its lights on late into that night, and a young woman with short black hair sat at a new desk with a fresh notebook open in front of her, and she began, quietly, to write.